Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Ariel. I am 32 years old, and I never thought I would be abandoned at a five-star restaurant on my birthday. When my husband, Julian, called me a disgrace in front of 20 wealthy guests and left me with a $5,372 bill, something inside me finally broke. Tears welled, but did not fall as I stared at the check, a strange calm washing over me. What Julian did not realize was that this humiliation would become his biggest mistake. I met Julian 3 years earlier at a school charity auction in Chicago. I was a third-grade teacher at South Shore Elementary, organizing the event to fund new playground equipment. Julian attended as a representative of his investment firm, which was making a corporate donation. He stood out immediately in a perfectly tailored navy suit among the cardigans and windbreakers, then bid $10,000 on a collaborative art piece my class had created. The room erupted in applause. After the auction, he approached me with a warm smile that reached his deep brown eyes. At 38, he exuded practiced confidence without obvious arrogance, and when he asked about the children who had painted the piece, I was touched by his apparent interest. "The children will be thrilled their work raised so much," I said, smoothing a strand of hair behind my ear. "The real value is your dedication to them," he replied. I am Julian Carter. Our worlds could not have been more different. I grew up in a middle-class family on Chicago's South Side, worked through college, and chose teaching for fulfillment rather than income. Julian had been born into wealth, educated in elite schools, and had expanded his family's fortune through shrewd investments. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant where he was charmed by my stories about my students. "You are refreshingly real," he said, reaching for my hand. "Most people in my circles want to be impressed." The romance moved with breathtaking speed. He surprised me with weekend getaways to Michigan's shoreline, sent flowers to my classroom, and listened attentively when I spoke about education. "You are different from anyone I have ever met," he would say, kissing my forehead. "You care about making a difference, not just making money." 8 months later, he proposed during a private dinner on a yacht in Lake Michigan. The ring was grander than anything I would have chosen, but his voice was soft. "You have shown me what truly matters, Ariel. Will you marry me?" I said yes through happy tears, ignoring the small voice asking if it was all too fast. The wedding was smaller than I expected given his resources. He said he wanted something intimate. Later I learned his family had concerns about our match. His mother, Elaine, smiled politely but without warmth. His father, Harold, watched me as if I were an equation to be solved. The cracks appeared slowly. 2 months into our marriage, he eyed my favorite floral dress before a dinner with colleagues. "Maybe wear the blue dress I bought you," he suggested. "It is more sophisticated." I changed without argument, eager to make a good impression. At dinner, he corrected my table etiquette with quiet touches and whispered hints. I laughed it off, thinking he was being helpful. The suggestions multiplied. He hired a stylist to elevate my wardrobe. He winced when I used expressions from my neighborhood. He interrupted me when I talked about teaching. "Ariel has a big heart," he would say, redirecting conversation before I could explain my work. I began monitoring my speech, appearance, and posture to avoid his subtle corrections. Without noticing when it started, I began molding myself to fit his world, losing pieces of myself in the process. My best friends noticed. During a rare coffee date 6 months into my marriage, Brianna studied me. "You hardly talk about your students anymore." "Julian thinks it is not interesting for most people," I said, defensive and tired. Keisha's eyes narrowed. "Since when do you bend for what impresses strangers? Those children are your passion." I brushed off their concerns, convinced they did not understand the adjustments required to bridge 2 different worlds. I believed Julian loved the real me, that our connection transcended background. "Love conquers all," I told them with a smile that felt stiff even on my face. What I did not admit was that I was already losing authenticity piece by piece. Each time I swallowed my thoughts, I faded. But I was devoted to our marriage and unwilling to face what was happening. 18 months into our marriage, Julian became one of the youngest partners at his firm. Our life shifted. We left our comfortable downtown apartment for a 5-bedroom house in River Forest with manicured gardens and a 3-car garage. The house felt like a museum to me. Each morning I wandered through beautifully staged rooms after he left for work, exchanging polite smiles with Monique, the housekeeper, who came 3 times a week. I missed the cheerful chaos of my classroom and the wobbly handwriting on the walls. I tried to find my footing. I joined a hospital fundraising committee, but the other women treated me with courteous distance. Their conversations revolved around private clubs and boarding schools. When I mentioned teaching in a public school, their attention cooled like a door closing. As Julian's career expanded, he compensated for his absence by including me in business dinners and social events. These evenings were a private kind of misery. I spent hours preparing, practicing small talk, researching names and deals, then stood at the periphery, smiling until my face hurt. When I engaged, Julian interjected. "Ariel is still learning the industry," he would say indulgently, patting my hand. Increasingly, these gatherings moved to our home. Julian invited colleagues, clients, and associates without consulting me, then expected me to manage everything. "Make sure it is perfect," he would say, adjusting my necklace. "These people are important to our future." I started to wonder what our future meant, exactly. My career soon slid off the table. "You do not need to work," he said. "It is not about money. Being a public school teacher does not align with our position now." I agreed reluctantly, promising myself it was temporary. To keep a connection to education, I began tutoring online a few hours a week when he was at work. I opened a separate bank account for that income, a small act of independence that soothed me in ways I could not name. The financial control tightened gradually. First, he suggested combining our accounts. Then he offered to handle all bills and investments since that was his expertise. Before long, I was asking for money to buy jeans, while he spent thousands on a watch or rare wines without pause. I began saving portions of my tutoring money as an emergency fund, without admitting to myself why I needed it. My world shrank as it expanded. Friends stopped calling after too many canceled plans. I missed my parents' calls because they always seemed to come when we were busy. My former principal's offer to return to teaching was declined with a speech about life moving in a different direction. One rainy afternoon, while Julian was at a conference, I discovered a text thread that had synced to our shared tablet. His mother had written, "Is Ariel adjusting better to your lifestyle?" He responded, "She is trying. Still rough around the edges, but I am working on it. You know your father, and I always thought you made a mistake," she wrote. "Someone from your background should have chosen more carefully." "I know, mother," he replied. "Sometimes I wonder if you were right." I stared at those words until they blurred. Was I a project? A charity case? That night, I cooked his favorite meal, wore the dress he once adored, and tried to talk. "I feel like we are drifting apart," I said. "That is ridiculous," he replied without looking up from his phone. "We have never been more successful." "I am not talking about success. I am talking about happiness." He finally looked at me, irritation flashing. "This is what an adult relationship looks like. We have responsibilities. We have a position to maintain." My birthday approached, and I made one last attempt to salvage whatever remained. "Can we have dinner, just the two of us?" He smiled that old warm smile. "Of course." He booked a table at a celebrated Chicago restaurant, Maison Lumiere, for 8 o'clock. "We're something special," he said. For the first time in months, I felt hope. That morning, he handed me a small blue box and a cup of coffee. "Happy birthday, beautiful," he said, fastening a platinum bracelet studded with sapphires around my wrist. I carried that tenderness with me through a hair appointment and careful makeup. I chose a midnight blue dress he had once approved, saving it for the right moment. At 5 o'clock, my phone chimed. Slight change of plans. Need to include the Whitakers and the Rivers couples. Business opportunity too good to miss. Car at 7. My heart sank, but I told myself it was only 2 couples. At 6 o'clock, another text arrived. Several more joining. Total party of 20. Moved to private room. We're the Black Valentino. My intimate birthday dinner had become a business event. The car delivered me to Maison Lumiere, where Julian waited in the lobby. He assessed my appearance with a brisk nod. Good choice, he said. These people represent over 50 million in potential investment. Follow my lead. There was no happy birthday this time. The private room glittered with crystal and silver. I recognized a few faces. Many were new. Julian guided me through introductions, his hand pressing firmly against the small of my back, steering me like a prop. This is my wife, Ariel, he would say, before turning the spotlight back to himself. Not once did he mention it was my birthday. I was seated between Mrs. Whitaker, a silver-haired woman with steady green eyes, and Mr. Rivers, whose attention remained fixed on his phone. Across the table, Julian performed, a blend of anecdotes and finely tuned humor. Mrs. Whitaker studied me. I hear you were a teacher. Yes, third grade, I said, grateful for the opening. Children at that age are curious and honest. How quaint, she murmured. Quite different from Julian's world. Her condescension stung, but I held my posture. Every world has value. Education shapes future leaders. As the main course arrived, Julian rose to toast a recent victory. Glasses were raised, congratulations exchanged. Not a word about my birthday. I reached for my water and accidentally knocked my nearly full wine glass. Red spilled across the white cloth and onto Mrs. Rivers's cream designer dress. She gasped. Servers rushed over. I am so sorry, I said, mortified. It was an accident. The room fell silent. Julian's expression turned into something cold and sharp. For God's sake, Ariel, he hissed. Can you do anything right? Mrs. Rivers dabbed at her dress and murmured that these things happen, but Julian stood and threw down his napkin. This is exactly what I am dealing with, he announced. Completely out of her depth. An absolute disgrace. The words hit like blows. I sat frozen. Julian, I whispered. Please do not. He ignored me and addressed Mr. Whitaker. I apologize for my wife's behavior. Some people cannot adapt to certain standards no matter how much guidance they receive. Mr. Whitaker looked uncomfortable. Perhaps we should move on. Accidents happen to everyone. But Julian had lost his grip on the mask. You cannot turn a public school teacher into someone worthy of this company, he continued. I would not cry there. I think I should leave, I said, standing on shaking legs. Yes, you should, he snapped. You have done enough damage. As I reached the door, he delivered his final blow. A woman like you should be grateful I even looked your way. In the corridor, the manager approached me. Ms. Carter, your party has departed, but they left without settling the bill. He handed me the leather folder. Inside, $5,372, every detail itemized. I stared at the amount as a strange calm replaced humiliation. This was not a disaster. It was freedom. The manager's name tag read Anthony. Is there a problem with the bill? He asked gently. No problem, I said, steadying my voice. My husband forgot his wallet along with basic decency. Would you like to use the office to make a call? He offered. Yes. Thank you. In a small office, he brought me water. Then he hesitated. This is not the first time your husband has dined here. We know him for his demanding nature. He has made servers cry. He has sent back perfectly prepared dishes. He has spoken to our team in ways that reflect poorly on him. The information settled like a final puzzle piece. The man I had married would not have done that, except he already had. I pulled out my phone and called a contact I had not used in over a year, attorney Renee Coleman, who once volunteered at my school to help families navigate legal issues. Renee, I said, I think my marriage is over. I need to understand my options. For 20 minutes, I gave her the condensed version. She listened, then asked one question first. Do you have money solely yours? Yes. A small tutoring fund. Good, she said. That is our starting point. Document everything. The financial control. The isolation. Tonight. The bill came first. Can you afford to pay it? Not personally, I said, but we have a joint platinum card. I am still legally his wife. Use it, she said, and keep the itemized receipt. After we hung up, I asked Anthony to process the card and provide a detailed copy. I also asked about the security cameras. We keep recordings for 90 days, he said carefully. If a subpoena arrives, we will comply. Please preserve the footage, I said. He nodded. Before I left, I asked to speak to the staff who had served our table. I apologized and thanked them, then said I might need their recollections if asked. I left generous cash tips from my emergency fund. The driver Julian had arranged was still waiting, already paid for the night, and he took me home. As we moved through the quiet streets, I made a mental list, documents, irreplaceable items, and evidence. At the house, I moved through the rooms like a ghost. I collected my passport, birth certificate, and social security card from our home office, family photographs, and my grandmother's jewelry from my dresser, my laptop and external drive with years of teaching materials. In Julian's office, I photographed physical statements, careful to leave everything as I found it. I discovered a prenuptial agreement I had barely understood during the whirlwind of wedding planning, accounts solely in his name, and records showing he had borrowed. The small inheritance my grandfather left me. I should have broken. Instead, each discovery strengthened my resolve. I removed my wedding and engagement rings and placed them on Julian's nightstand with a note. You are right. I should be grateful. Grateful that I now see clearly. Then I drove to Brianna's apartment. "Welcome home," she said, pulling me into a hug. For the first time in years, I slept deeply. Morning arrived with a flurry of messages. 33 missed calls from Julian. A scroll of texts moving from anger to bargaining. "You embarrass me in front of important clients. Where are you? You have no right to disappear. Please come home. I am sorry I lost my temper. If you do not come home immediately, there will be consequences." I read each message without responding. I had an appointment with Renee at 9 o'clock. Renee's office overlooked Millennium Park. She greeted me with a hug, then became the precise attorney I remembered. We established the facts: emotional abuse, financial control, misappropriation of my inheritance. For 2 hours, we documented everything. The prenuptial agreement primarily shielded his family assets, she said, but equitable distribution in Illinois was about fairness, and we had leverage, especially with evidence of financial control and public humiliation. "Men like your husband value reputation above all else," she added. "That is leverage, too." We drafted a letter requesting mediation rather than filing immediately. It signaled reasonableness and seriousness at once. "Do you have a safe place to stay?" "Yes." "Do you want to return to teaching?" The question struck me like a bell. "Yes," I said. "More than anything." Renee nodded. "I know a superintendent in Oak Park. Mid-year openings happen." I visited my old principal at South Shore that afternoon. He beamed when he saw me. We talked about the children, about possibilities, about hope. Before I left, he introduced me to my replacement, a young teacher named Alicia, who invited me to visit the classroom. "The children would love to meet you," she said. Walking into that room felt like coming home. Anthony from Maison Lumiere called that evening to check on me. "The footage is marked for retention," he said. "Thank you," I replied. "That means more than you know." 3 days later, we received a formal request from Julian's attorney, Carlton Drake, to meet. "Let him make the first offer," Renee advised. In the conference room of a glass and steel high-rise, Julian sat across the polished table, his immaculate image dented, unshaven, eyes bruised with sleeplessness. He tried to smile. "Ariel, I am so sorry. I was stressed. It did not mean anything." "Let us keep this professional," Renee said smoothly. Drake offered what he called a generous proposal. A year of support while I got back on my feet, conditioned on a confidentiality agreement that would silence me. Renee's smile was thin. "We are not here to negotiate the prenuptial agreement. We are here to discuss Mr. Carter's misappropriation of my client's inheritance, his pattern of economic control, and the career sacrifices my client made for this marriage." Julian's face darkened. "I gave you everything," he said to me. "A beautiful home. Security. After you stripped away my independence, my career, and my self-respect," I said, meeting his eyes. "We have documentation," Renee continued, "and witness statements about your public humiliation tactics. We also have security footage from Maison Lumiere of you calling your wife a disgrace in front of 20 business associates, abandoning her with a $5,000 bill on her birthday and stating, and I quote, 'A woman like you should be grateful I even looked your way.'" The color drained from Julian's face. "You would not make this public," he said. "Think about my reputation." "We would prefer not to," I replied. "But I will not be silenced or cheated." The meeting ended with Drake requesting time to confer with his client. In the corridor, Julian reached for my arm. "You have changed," he said, amazed and angry. I gently removed his hand. "No, Julian. I remembered who I am. You just never saw me." 2 weeks later, we reached a settlement. Julian returned my inheritance with interest, provided a fair financial settlement acknowledging my contributions, and transferred a small 3-unit building in Hyde Park that would produce steady rental income. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue more aggressive claims that could become public. I refused any clause that would keep me from telling my own story. 6 months later, I stood in front of my new classroom at Oak Park Elementary, watching 23 third graders file in. My classroom. The words thrilled me. The walls were covered with student art and reading progress charts. "Good morning, Ms. Turner," they chorused. "Good morning, amazing humans," I answered and meant every syllable. I returned mid-year as a long-term substitute, then earned the permanent role. The exhaustion was real, but it was the kind that cleansed. My apartment was a walk from the school, a sunny unit in the Hyde Park building from the settlement. I rented out the other units and decorated my place with color, books, and plants. Brianna and Keisha were back in my life. We had a standing Sunday brunch. Not a miracle. I told them once when they called Renee a magician. Just leverage placed precisely. Healing arrived in unexpected ways. A quiet student named Jada transferred in, shy behind thick glasses. When I overheard a classmate teasing her, I knelt to meet her eyes. Do you know what I see when I look at you? She shook her head. I see someone who notices details others miss, who thinks carefully before speaking, whose kindness will change lives. Over the months, she bloomed. Watching her reminded me daily of the power of being seen. I learned through acquaintances that Julian lost the Whitaker account. The ripples damaged his standing at the firm. I felt no triumph, only the simple knowledge that actions have consequences. One Saturday, I looked up from grading papers to see Anthony at my favorite coffee shop. He lived nearby, he said, and asked to sit. Over coffee that turned into lunch, I learned he was working on a master's degree in hospitality management. He asked thoughtful questions about my classroom and listened with genuine interest. We exchanged numbers. Occasional messages became regular conversations about books, films, and family. He never tried to impress me with status. He valued substance. During that period, I began writing. It started as private journaling and grew into essays about identifying control, rebuilding a life, and reclaiming self-worth. Readers found the work, and a community gathered around the words. I kept it careful and private. I never used Julian's name or details that would identify anyone. The goal was not revenge. It was clarity. One evening, Anthony and I walked along the lakefront after dinner. Do you think you will marry again? He asked gently. I watched the water darken and finally said, I do not know. But I know I will never shrink myself to fit someone else's vision again. He nodded and did not press. We walked in comfortable silence. Whatever we were becoming, it was grounded in respect. A year to the day after the restaurant, I stood on my balcony and watched the sun rise over Hyde Park. A full year of healing. Morning coffee without criticism. Evenings spent however I pleased. Friendships restored. A career I loved. The journey had not been linear. There were days when grief ambushed me, not for Julian, but for the years I spent erasing myself. There were nights when doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps I overreacted. Those nights became fewer. That morning, an email arrived from a name I did not recognize, Eleanor Rivers. She wrote that she had been at Maison Lumière the night Julian abandoned me. She did not realize at first that the essays she was reading were mine, but details clicked into place. Watching your husband's cruelty and your dignity forced me to recognize similar patterns in my own life, she wrote. 3 months ago, I found the courage to leave. You were not the disgrace that night. You were the inspiration. Tears blurred the screen. The thought that my worst moment had illuminated someone else's path overwhelmed me. Our darkest experiences can become beacons for others. I responded with thanks and invited her to a support circle I helped organize for women rebuilding after controlling relationships. Later that day, I introduced a community project to my class. We would create care packages for a local women's shelter, each with necessities and handwritten notes. Words have power, I told my students. They can harm, but they can also heal. Let us write words that remind people they matter. As the children bent over their cards, I felt a steady, profound rightness settle into my bones. From that birthday dinner to this classroom, every step had been necessary. Like a bone that breaks and heals stronger at the fracture, I had emerged more resilient and more entirely myself. The woman who paid that $5,372 bill with trembling hands was a cocoon. The person standing here is the butterfly. I am Ariel. I went quiet for too long. I know the sound of my own voice now. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.